Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. April 10th, 2017 started like any other Monday morning in Juan Bautista Alberti, a small farming town tucked in the southern edge of Argentina's Tucumán province. By 6:30 a.m., the fields were already damp with dew, the early sun low and dull, the rural air still silent. Jorge Esteban, a local soybean farmer, was doing what he did every morning, walking his perimeter on foot. He didn't expect to find a body. Just past the third row from the southern irrigation ditch, Esteban stopped cold. Something pale and crumpled was lying between the soy plants. At first he thought it was a scarecrow, or maybe a pile of clothes dumped by vandals. But as he stepped closer, it became clear. It was a girl. She wasn't moving. He didn't touch her. He didn't say a word. He backed away, trembling, pulled his phone from his vest pocket, and called 911. His voice, later retrieved from the dispatch logs, was flat with disbelief. "There's a girl in my field. School uniform. I think she's dead. I didn't go near her. Please, just send someone." Police arrived just after 6:20. First on scene was Officer Lucia Ramirez, followed by Lieutenant Jorge Sanchez, head of the local investigative unit. The area was cordoned off by 6:40, no visible signs of movement around the body. No drag marks, no blood trail. The soil beneath her was undisturbed. Whoever had left her there knew exactly where to put her and how not to leave anything behind. She was lying on her back, arms splayed, skirt twisted above her hips, blouse torn at the collar, one shoe missing, the other half off, hanging by the heel. The position of her limbs was unnatural but not chaotic. Her skin was pale, lips slightly parted. Her eyes were open, lifeless, dried from the wind. Around her neck, a deep, clean indentation formed a thin reddish band. Too smooth to be a rope, too narrow for a belt. It looked like a shoelace. There were no immediate signs of a struggle, at least not here, but the bruising around her jaw suggested blunt force trauma. Small scratches lined the underside of her wrists and the back of her left hand. Under her nails, dark flecks of dried organic matter. Forensic techs swabbed it without delay. 10 feet away, officers found a torn school backpack. Inside were two notebooks, a biology textbook, and a deodorant stick. One of the notebooks had a name scribbled inside the cover in ballpoint pen: Ornella Dottori, Tudo Año. That was their first ID. The coroner pronounced her dead on scene at 7:15. Based on the lack of lividity, the body's temperature, and ambient conditions, the estimated time of death was between 12:30 and 1:30 a.m. No blood at the scene, no sign of post-mortem movement. She had been killed elsewhere, or the act had left no trace. The forensics team began photographing the body from all angles. Drone footage was captured. Environmental samples were logged. Nearby vegetation was intact, undisturbed. A few partial footprints were visible on the southern edge of the field. 3 distinct impressions, male size. One matched a known Reebok sole pattern. None showed signs of overlapping with the victims. Only one set came in, and that same set went out. There were no tire marks within 100 meters. The nearest road was a gravel stretch, still damp from rainfall 2 nights earlier. If a car had been there, it would have left something. But the ground was clean. By 8:10 a.m., a team was dispatched to the address listed in the school registry under Ornella Dottori, a single-story brick house with a corrugated tin roof. Sylvia Dottori, the victim's mother, answered the door. She was calm at first. She had believed her daughter had stayed overnight at a friend's house. The moment police mentioned the field, she collapsed. Ornella was 16 years old, a second-year student at Escuela República del Paraguay. Quiet, introverted, no disciplinary record, no boyfriend that the mother knew of, no recent behavioral problems. She lived with her mother and maternal grandparents. Her father was not in the picture. She had no job, no vehicle, and no known enemies. That Sunday night, Sylvia said Ornella told her she was going to study at Luciana's house, a classmate who lived just 4 blocks away. She left around 9:30 p.m., wearing her uniform and carrying her backpack. Sylvia assumed she had returned early in the morning. The bed was still made. Nothing in the house was out of place. By 9 a.m., officers interviewed Luciana, the supposed friend. She stated Ornella never arrived. They hadn't made plans to meet. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood was limited. One gas station camera caught a figure matching Ornella's height and clothing, walking eastward down Murd.ered at 9:52 p.m. That was the last confirmed sighting. At 11 West a.m., a transport vehicle moved the body from the field to the provincial forensic lab in San Miguel de Tucumán. The autopsy was scheduled for 7 p.m. The preliminary checklist was short: collect fingernail scrapings, perform full sexual assault panel, log any foreign DNA, inspect cervical trauma, and run a standard toxicology screen. What no one expected, what wasn't even considered yet, was that she had been pregnant. Back at the scene, Lieutenant Sanchez stood silently with the field report in hand. The facts didn't line up. No screams were reported. No neighbor had heard anything. Ornella had left home unarmed, unafraid. Her social media activity ended abruptly just after 9:40 p.m. Her WhatsApp showed one outgoing message that night, sent at 9:42. Estoy en camino. I'm on my way. But to who? And where was her phone? Sanchez watched the field techs pack up the evidence. A girl had been left here like a discarded object. Arranged, posed, erased. Not even the soil fought back. The body arrived at the provincial forensic lab in San Miguel de Tucumán just after noon on April 10, 2017. By that point, the identity of the victim was confirmed. What remained unknown was everything else. The autopsy was scheduled for 7 p.m., conducted by Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Fabian Ocampo. The room was sterile, quiet, lit with cold surgical fluorescence. Standard protocol began: photographs of the body at multiple angles, documentation of clothing condition, external observations prior to incision. Initial inspection showed linear abrasions across the left wrist and minor contusions near the shoulder blades. The neck ligature mark was distinct, measuring approximately 0.5 inches in width, uniform in pressure, and consistent with a single pull constriction. No knot impressions were visible on the skin surface. No fibers or debris found embedded in the dermis. The lack of multiple ligature passes indicated it was quick. Done in one motion, no hesitation. There were no broken bones, no skull fracture, no defensive wounds on the hands or forearms. But beneath the nails, forensic techs recovered dark organic residue, later confirmed as soil and epithelial fragments not belonging to the victim. Those samples were fast-tracked for DNA comparison. During the pelvic examination, foreign DNA was recovered from the vaginal vault. Seminal fluid was present, non-coagulated, suggesting the act occurred shortly before or after death. Vaginal trauma was noted, partial lacerations and inflammation. The medical report later listed the assault as forced penetration with minimal tissue healing window, ruling out any consensual contact occurring days earlier. But the detail that shifted the case was found during internal scan. At 6 weeks gestation, the fetus was too small to identify gender or features, but unmistakable on the ultrasound. Ornella Dottori had been pregnant. She hadn't told anyone. The uterus was intact. There were no signs of an attempted miscarriage. No drugs in her bloodstream to indicate abortion agents. Toxicology came back negative. No alcohol, no benzodiazepines, no illicit substances. She had been sober, aware, and alone. The findings were forwarded to the lead investigative team by 9 p.m. Lieutenant Sanchez reviewed the preliminary autopsy report in silence. He didn't speak to the press that day. What was on paper raised more questions than it answered. If she had been pregnant, why hadn't anyone known? No friend, no teacher, not even her mother had mentioned it. There was no clinic record, no prenatal appointment in her name, no purchase history of pregnancy tests from nearby pharmacies under family accounts. If someone had gotten her pregnant and wanted to keep it quiet, strangulation was a brutal solution. But it was effective. Clean, silent, irreversible. He called the mother in for a second statement the following day. Sylvia Dottori was already overwhelmed by grief but agreed to speak again. When told about the pregnancy, she broke down. She didn't know. She said there had been no signs, no changes in appetite, no morning sickness, nothing. At that stage, investigators requested full access to Ornella's private devices, but her cell phone was still missing. It had not been found on her body, in the field, or anywhere on the route between her home and the location where she was discovered. Her laptop, when recovered from her bedroom, was password protected. A warrant was obtained for forensic extraction. The digital team began imaging the device and creating a timeline of messages, saved documents, and browser history. Data sync with cloud backups recovered fragments of WhatsApp conversations. Most had been deleted. Factory reset of the phone occurred days before. But Ornella's WhatsApp web session had remained open on the laptop. Cached data revealed conversations with a contact labeled only by initials, GC. The tone of the messages was careful, compressed, no names, no threats. But one pattern stood out. In the final 3 weeks leading to her death, Ornella had become increasingly hesitant in tone. Phrases like, "I can't do this," and "it's getting dangerous," repeated more than once. On April 9th at 9:37 p.m., she typed, "Are you going to be there?" The reply, time-stamped 9:39 p.m. "Yes, hurry, don't talk to anyone." Her final outgoing message was sent at 9:42 p.m. "I'm on my way." It was not addressed to a friend, and it was never answered. Digital analysts traced the IP of the last WhatsApp login on her phone to a commercial Wi-Fi node in downtown Alberta. The location was a small electronics shop, a place that also bought used phones. This was the first concrete lead on the missing device. The next morning, officers visited the shop. They requested logs of purchased electronics from April 10th and 11th. One record stood out. A Samsung Galaxy J2, same model as Ornella's, was sold for cash on April 11th by a young man. Security footage confirmed the exchange. The face was clearly visible. The phone was already resold, but the seller's name was logged. Gustavo Carrizo. Sanchez didn't make the arrest that day. They needed more. Selling the phone proved proximity. It didn't prove murder. But now a timeline was taking shape. A deleted set of messages, a lost phone that changed hands quickly, and a digital thread that led straight to someone who told her to hurry. In towns like Alberta, what doesn't get spoken becomes poisonous. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just come from grief. It comes from what people choose not to see. A girl was pregnant, dead, and discarded in a field. Someone else had planned it that way. Someone knew, and the data wasn't lying. It never does. But sometimes, as one investigator quietly wrote in his notes that night, the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. The forensic data team began extracting every recoverable file from Ornella Dottori's laptop just after the autopsy report was finalized. Her Samsung Galaxy J2 was still missing, but her WhatsApp web session had remained open. One small oversight that preserved what otherwise might have vanished for good. The cache yielded fragments, time-stamped conversations, only some intact. Her last 3 weeks of messages to one contact, saved under the initials GC, revealed a shift. Early texts were short, vague, but the tone changed in the final days. There was tension in the language. She stopped using emojis. Her replies slowed. She started typing full sentences, including punctuation, something a forensic linguist later noted as a psychological indicator of anxiety. April 8th. You said no one would find out. April 9th, 9:42 p.m. I'm on my way. After that, silence. A search warrant for the IP addresses used to log into her phone showed that it had reconnected once, on the morning of April 11th, just past 10 a.m. The access point matched a commercial network at a downtown electronics store. The same store where a Samsung Galaxy J2 had been sold by a young man less than 24 hours after Ornella's body was discovered. The buyer didn't record the IMEI number, but security footage confirmed the seller's identity. He hadn't worn a mask. The phone had already been factory reset. Data was unrecoverable. But this wasn't about the device anymore. It was about the person who had it and what they knew. The individual in the footage was identified as Gustavo Carrizo, 19 years old, resident of the same neighborhood as Ornella. No criminal record, not listed in her school system, but further database queries revealed that his older sister had attended the same school Ornella was enrolled in the year prior. There was proximity, opportunity, but no hard link yet. Lieutenant Sanchez didn't move on the suspect immediately. Timing mattered. Public scrutiny was growing, but forensic protocol needed space. They mapped digital traces from both ends. Ornella's laptop and the recovered logs from WhatsApp servers. A digital analyst pulled metadata from the cached messages. The device that had sent the last messages to Ornella used a SIM card registered under a prepaid account. No ID required, disposable. But the IP addresses weren't disposable. Between March 25 and April 9th, the GC Contacts device had connected multiple times using a fixed residential network. It was registered under a household 5 blocks from Ornella's school. The leaseholder's name was Gloria Carrizo, Gustavo's mother. By the third week of April, investigators had connected the following. The suspect's phone and Ornella's shared geolocation data on 3 separate nights. The final overlap was April 9th between 10:10 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. Same area code, same cell tower ping, less than 900 meters from the soybean field. Cell tower triangulation was not exact science, but it was good enough. Combined with metadata, it established opportunity and proximity. And there was more. Digital forensics retrieved an autosave draft email from Ornella's laptop, written on April 4th. It was never sent. It read, "I want to tell, but I don't think I can. I wish I didn't say anything. If something happens to me, someone needs to look. Don't believe it was an accident." She had typed it at 2:12 a.m., then closed the window. The draft saved automatically. She never reopened it. A forensic linguist flagged the phrase, "Don't believe it was an accident," as especially pointed. The timing lined up with the sharp tonal change in her chats. Something had shifted after April 2nd. Whatever she feared, it escalated in less than a week. The messages were now central evidence. But without a confession, the case remained circumstantial. So the next step was to pull Carrizo's own digital records. Officers obtained a warrant for his phone activity logs. It was basic, prepaid, no name, but the cell traffic between his number and Ornella's in the weeks before her death was substantial. Over 70 messages, 14 voice calls, 2 midnight-hour data sessions within 24 hours of the estimated time of death. When cross-referenced with neighborhood security footage, Carrizo had passed the gas station camera on foot at 12:41 a.m. on April 10th. Direction, south. The field was just under a kilometer from that spot. He appeared to be alone. No phone in his hand. No visible bag, just walking. He didn't look back. There's a common phrase in digital investigation. Deleted doesn't mean gone. It just means buried. Ornella's data was never buried deep enough. The truth, at least part of it, was still embedded in the gaps she left behind. She never sent that email. She never answered that last message. She never told anyone about the pregnancy. But everything she didn't say, everything she typed and erased, still pointed towards someone. And sometimes the things people fail to delete are louder than what they leave behind. On April 17, 2017, exactly 1 week after Ornella Dottori's body was found, Gustavo Carrizo was brought in for a non-custodial interview. He wasn't under arrest. Yet, he arrived at the station without an attorney, calm, wearing a hoodie and sneakers, not showing signs of stress or hesitation. According to the officer who escorted him in, he asked twice whether the questioning was routine. That word was noted in the interview summary. Most suspects don't use it unprompted. Carrizo was not told about the full extent of the forensic data collected. He was only asked basic questions. Did he know Ornella? When did they last speak? Did he own a Samsung Galaxy J2? Why had he visited an electronics shop on April 11th? He admitted to knowing her, just from Facebook, as he phrased it. He said they had exchanged messages occasionally. He denied seeing her in person the week she died. He said he hadn't heard from her since early April. When asked about the phone he sold, he claimed it had been his for months. A cheap model, not worth much. No mention of where or how he got it. Investigators didn't confront him then. They let him talk. After 40 minutes, the inconsistencies began to surface. Carrizo claimed he had been home the night of April 9th. When pressed on who could verify that, he said his mother. But his mother, interviewed separately the day before, had given a different story. She hadn't seen him that night until well after midnight. That window mattered. Ornella's time of death had been narrowed to between 12:30 and 1:30 a.m. Then there was the walk. He told officers he never passed near the Esteban field, but surveillance footage from a gas station 0.9 kilometers away showed someone matching his build and clothing, walking in that direction at 12:41 a.m., only an hour before the estimated time of death. He said it couldn't be him. He never goes that way. They didn't press him further. They didn't need to. Not yet. The transcript of the interview was added to the case file, and officers shifted to building the external pressure points. First, confirming his movements across the week leading to the homicide. Second, analyzing the usage pattern of the SIM card found tied to the phone Ornella had been communicating with. Third, comparing his timeline to known forensic markers, IP logins, cell tower pings, digital activity gaps. Pattern analysis found that his phone had gone dark, no outgoing messages, no location signals, from 10:12 p.m. on April 9th until 3:47 a.m. on April 10th. 3 investigators circled that gap, 3 hours and 35 minutes. It matched too neatly with the window in which Ornella vanished, died, and was left in a field. When questioned again about that period, Carrizo claimed his phone had died, but data showed it reconnected to a mobile tower at 3:47 a.m. with 87% battery. The data wasn't matching the story. At that point, detectives ordered the extraction of backup data from Carrizo's cloud account. He'd used the same Gmail address for years. His search history from April 6 to April 10th was pulled. 3 keywords flagged. Pregnancy detection without symptoms. How early can someone tell delete WhatsApp backup permanently? Searches conducted from the same device used to message Ornella. The autopsy had already confirmed pregnancy. Her school records showed no counseling. Her mother hadn't noticed. But someone knew, someone had searched, and someone had reason to worry that she might tell. When investigators checked the trash folder in his Gmail, they found 2 deleted draft emails, both unsent. One contained only a single sentence. I didn't mean to hurt her. There was no metadata to show when it had been written. The file was deleted. But the sentiment, however vague, sat uneasily beside the rest of the file. Investigators paused before making an arrest. They had enough for probable cause, but they needed to map motive legally. A rushed case could fall apart on technical grounds. They requested a forensic psychological review. The suspect was not aware. The report was brief but decisive. The behavioral analyst flagged avoidance, inconsistency, and deception patterns across his statements. No known diagnosis, but multiple risk markers. He exhibited flat affect in response to confrontation. No emotional deviation when told Ornella had died. The words he used were distant. Situation, complication, problem, not she. That word never came up in the interview. Sometimes the gap in a story isn't in what a suspect says. It's in what they never mention. Carrizo never asked how she died, never asked when, never asked why police were even interested in him, as if he already knew. By the 3rd week of April 2017, the investigation into Ornella Dettori's death was no longer fragmented. What had started as a vague digital trail was now crossing into physical space, and the story told by forensics didn't align with any version Carrizo had given. The ligature mark on Ornella's neck, first noted during the autopsy, had been clean, narrow, and shallow enough to suggest controlled pressure. When the lab reanalyzed impressions on her throat with infrared mapping, they identified partial tread patterns, consistent with the texture found on the underside of an athletic shoelace, Reebok specifically. Investigators returned to the suspect's home with a new warrant. Inside his bedroom, they photographed a pair of Reebok sneakers loosely stored under the bed. The laces matched the width and tension measurements from the neck impressions. One of them had fraying near the knot, consistent with rapid pull force. The shoes were bagged, tagged, and sent to the lab for fiber comparison. On the insole of the left shoe, forensic techs lifted a partial blood trace, minute, almost invisible. DNA matched Ornella's profile. That detail changed the weight of the evidence. It was no longer about what he said or failed to explain. Now it was what he'd left behind without knowing. Digital and physical evidence converged again. Data from the recovered WhatsApp messages had placed him near the scene. His phone, silent for hours, had been turned back on just before dawn. He sold her phone the next day, and now Ornella's blood was in his shoe. He had said they hadn't seen each other in weeks, but forensic sequencing showed otherwise. Semen from the assault kit had already returned a match to Carrizo's DNA. There was no question of identity anymore. The case now centered on intent and sequence. What had happened and when? There were no signs Ornella had tried to flee. No defensive wounds, no broken fingernails. Just soil under her nails and skin from his body, lodged in the soft ridges of her hands. That kind of stillness only happens when someone freezes, either from fear or from knowing there's no point in running. For investigators, the next task was to reestablish her movements. The last verified sighting was still the gas station camera, time-stamped 9:52 p.m. on April 9th. After that, nothing. But phone data placed her device near the town's edge by 10:20 p.m., then silence. When teams re-scanned the route from her house to the field, they stopped at a narrow service road. A neighbor reported hearing voices around midnight. Not a scream, just a sharp exchange. One voice female, one male. The neighbor hadn't looked outside. That moment, unconfirmed but time-aligned, was enough to refocus search grids. On April 21st, officers found something behind a brush cluster just off the field's eastern border. A discarded black hoodie. In the right pocket, there was a broken piece of plastic. It was a SIM card tray, bent and snapped at the edge. The lab confirmed it belonged to a Samsung Galaxy J2. No fingerprints were recoverable, but the hoodie size matched Carrizo's. It was similar to the one he wore when entering the electronics shop 2 days later. This wasn't about finding a smoking gun. It was about showing that everything, every message, every trace, every decision, narrowed toward a single trajectory. Cases like this don't fall apart in the courtroom because of emotion. They fall apart because of uncertainty. But when physical evidence stacks without gaps, it stops being theory. It becomes a chain. One step, one mistake, one girl alone. And nothing about any of it was gentle. The pregnancy had been confirmed within the first 48 hours of Ornella Dottori's autopsy. But 6 weeks into gestation, there was no DNA sample available from the fetus that could be used for paternity testing. The tissue wasn't viable, and the body had begun to break down too quickly for anything more to be recovered. That meant the investigation had to turn elsewhere. If Ornella hadn't told her family, and if no medical appointments had been made, then the only possible answers were going to come from either digital correspondence or witness testimony. Neither route produced what the investigators hoped for. Her classmates described her as quiet, often withdrawn. She didn't talk about boys. She had no known history of romantic involvement. Friends described a change in her demeanor over the final 2 months of her life. She'd stopped eating lunch with her usual group. She left school quickly each day, and she had begun wearing looser clothing, even during the warmer days in March. Something that didn't raise alarms until the coroner's report made everything clear. Search history on her laptop revealed that she had visited 3 pregnancy forums. All anonymous, no usernames, no logins, just articles. One bookmark remained, "What to do if you're pregnant and alone." She had read it on March 26th. There was no follow-up. That's when the investigative team shifted strategy. If they couldn't prove who the father was, they had to at least determine whether anyone else knew she was pregnant. One girl came forward quietly, a 15-year-old peer who had shared a school project with Ornella 3 weeks before her death. She remembered Ornella excusing herself several times to go to the bathroom, and during one break, briefly mentioning that she didn't feel normal. It wasn't phrased as a complaint, more like a quiet confession. That same girl also remembered Ornella saying she didn't know who to trust. That was all they had. No diary, no written letters, no saved notes, no recorded confessions. Carrizo had been asked during preliminary questioning if he was aware that Ornella was pregnant. He denied it, but browser history retrieved from his account showed otherwise. His searches included variations of the question, how soon can a girl find out she's pregnant? And do all pregnancies cause symptoms right away? The timestamp on those queries was April 6th, 4 days before Ornella was found dead. There was no legal obligation to identify the father if no paternity evidence existed. And the Dottori family, already overwhelmed, had declined a request to exhume the fetus for speculative DNA matching. The district attorney chose not to pursue that angle, citing insufficient cause. But in the minds of investigators, one reality stood. Someone knew, and that knowledge had value, because it added context to the motive. If Ornella had threatened to speak out, and someone had something to lose, that changed the weight of the act. It wasn't just a murder, it became a silencing. But that narrative required care. Without paternity evidence or confession, the prosecution couldn't build their argument around it. The pregnancy had to be considered motive adjacent, not primary. Still, its presence shaped how people in the town responded. For some, it made the case harder to talk about. For others, it made it harder to ignore. In communities like Alberti, when a girl that young turns up pregnant and murdered, it doesn't just raise moral questions. It fractures how people see each other. A teacher wondered aloud to investigators why she hadn't asked more questions. A neighbor stopped sending her daughter to the same school. And Ornella's mother, already caring more than any parent should, was left without even the basic answer to one of the few things she had left to ask. Who was the father of her child? No one ever said. The trial of Arnaldo Carrizo began on May 8, 2017, in the Criminal Court of Santiago del Estero. Security was tight. Public attention was intense. For months, media coverage had primed the region for a courtroom spectacle, one that would either deliver closure to the family of Ornella de Torre or expose the limitations of a justice system struggling to hold individuals accountable in crimes involving vulnerable minors. Carrizo's defense team entered with a strategy rooted in denial. They claimed there was no direct evidence linking their client to Ornella's death. No murder weapon, no eyewitness, no surveillance. They also emphasized the lack of a clear timeline of events between the last confirmed sighting of Ornella and the discovery of her body. But the prosecution didn't build its case on spectacle or emotion. They leaned heavily on the physical evidence and the technical work carried out by forensics. Starting with the autopsy, the prosecutor walked the jury through every confirmed injury. The compression marks on Ornella's neck, consistent with manual strangulation, the abrasions and bruises that suggested a struggle, the absence of defensive wounds on her hands, evidence that she'd likely been overpowered or subdued quickly. She was not killed in a random act of violence. She was targeted. DNA recovered from beneath her fingernails was partial, degraded, but suggestive. While not sufficient to conclusively identify Carrizo, it could not be excluded. Further compounding this were inconsistencies in Carrizo's own statements. Initially, he denied any contact with Ornella in the week before her death, but digital records showed they had exchanged several messages in late March. The defense argued these were about school materials. The prosecution countered with a digital timestamp showing Carrizo had deleted messages from his end, just hours after Ornella's death became public. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to frame a narrative of concealment. Two witnesses further destabilized Carrizo's alibi. A teacher testified that she had seen Carrizo and Ornella in a hallway, alone, the week before her disappearance, despite Carrizo's denial of any in-person interaction during that period. A fellow student reported seeing Ornella crying outside the school building that same day. She said she overheard part of a conversation. "You promised," followed by silence. These weren't declarations of guilt, but in combination, they dismantled Carrizo's claim of having nothing to do with her life or death. One of the most striking parts of the trial came when Ornella's pregnancy was addressed. The prosecution didn't accuse Carrizo of being the father. They couldn't, but they argued that the pregnancy, regardless of paternity, introduced a powerful motive: fear. Fear of exposure, fear of consequence, fear of losing control. For someone who held a position of power, formally or informally, any association with a pregnant underage girl would have been socially and professionally damning. Carrizo remained stoic throughout the trial. He spoke only when required, always through counsel. He did not testify. The court allowed the jury to consider his silence as a right, not an implication. The verdict came after 5 days of deliberation. Guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. There was no outburst in the courtroom, no dramatic declarations. Ornella's mother sat silently as the sentence was read. Her lawyer later told reporters that the family felt relief, but not closure. The trial had settled the legal case. It had not and could not explain why no one had seen the danger earlier, or how a 16-year-old girl had ended up isolated enough that her pregnancy, her fear, and her final hours remained a mystery even after justice had been served. This wasn't just a case about a man who killed a teenage girl. It was a case about the silences that protect predators, in the systems that overlook the quiet suffering of girls like Ornella, until it's too late. The verdict came swiftly. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. On February 1st, 2024, a Tarrant County jury found Esteban Carrizo guilty of capital murder in the death of 16-year-old Ornella Sierra Carrillo. The courtroom, which had been heavy with tension for weeks, exhaled all at once. Carrizo sat motionless as the sentence was read. No outburst, no plea. Just the final seal on a crime that had stunned an entire community. But justice in the legal sense rarely means closure in the emotional one. In the weeks following the trial, the Carrillo family retreated into silence. Ornella's mother declined public interviews. Her father released a short statement thanking investigators and prosecutors and urging the community to look out for the girls who feel like they have no voice. The words were brief but told of exhaustion, the kind that lingers long after headlines fade. The school where Ornella once walked the halls implemented new safeguards, including expanded student support resources and stricter visitor protocols. But for many staff and students, no policy change could undo the emotional damage left behind. Teachers who'd once smiled at Ornella in the hallway now struggled to say her name aloud. Trauma lingers differently for everyone. The press gradually moved on. Other stories took center stage. But the files on this case, two thick binders now archived in the Fort Worth Police Department's homicide unit, remain a sharp reminder of how warning signs can be missed even in plain view. The physical evidence had spoken volumes: text messages, geolocation history, the recovered DNA, the ultrasound photo linked to Ornella's phone, the body left to decompose beneath a mattress in a locked room. But it was the larger silence surrounding her circumstances that still raised deeper questions. Why hadn't Ornella told a friend? Why did she hide her pregnancy? Was she afraid, ashamed, or just cornered by someone who held all the control? In courtroom testimony, Carrizo's motive never shifted. He was the father of the unborn child. He had a wife, a family, a reputation he wasn't willing to tarnish. Rather than face the consequences of his own choices, he chose to erase theirs, permanently. No ruling could return Ornella's future, but it did cement something more difficult to quantify: accountability. That a man who preyed on a minor, abused trust, and acted with premeditation would spend the rest of his life in a cell. There was no restitution, no final confrontation, only a community left with the facts. The memory of a girl silenced too soon, and a system now more alert, but still not foolproof. Cases like this remind us, predators rarely fit a single profile. Sometimes they wear authority like a uniform. Sometimes they walk right into your home. The lesson is not only about vigilance, but about believing young people when they speak up and noticing when they don't. Ornella's story is now part of the public record, a line in the ledger of Texas criminal law. But for her family and for the quiet corners of Fort Worth where her name is still whispered, she is not a case file. She is a daughter, a student, a victim of silence, fear, and the fatal cost of secrecy. What happened to Ornella wasn't just a crime. It was a collapse of trust, a reminder that silence can be deadly when the signs are overlooked. As someone who has followed every step of this case, I've come to believe that we have a responsibility, not just as individuals, but as a society, to listen closely, to speak up early, and to never assume safety just because danger isn't visible. If this story struck a chord with you, share your thoughts below. What would you have done differently if this was someone in your community? And hey, if you found this video moving or meaningful in any way, let me know where you're watching from. Or if it didn't resonate with you, I'd still love to hear why. Your voice matters. If you want more real stories like this, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next.